While editing the video, I came upon another problem and I had to insert it and go back to recording because it's very important and this is going to mess up the numbering of the problems later in the video, but I'm going to do it anyway. It is that they are not playtesting the rule changes. What has caused the most discussion online and what people care most about are the changes in the 1D&D document that affect the core engine of the game. The long changes to inspiration, to long rests, to D20 tests. And they don't ask in this survey, when asking for feedback on those rule changes on the glossary, whether they play tested the rule changes in the glossary. And this gets back to the point I've been making in my first two videos that this does not seem to be an actual play test. It seems to be more a marketing test to generate hype. An actual play test is an application of the scientific method. You have a design team that identifies a problem or has a design goal and has a hypothesis, has a set of rules that they want to test with players actually using them. And when you're not asking players filling out your survey whether they actually play tested the rules you're asking their opinion on, you're not intending to get feedback from playtesting. You're not able to know who the actual playtesters are and hone in on their multiple choice answers and their comment form, the playtest reports that they put in the comment box. So what results is feedback that's quite superficial. The changes to rules in the rules glossary have been the most opaque to players. The design goals of these changes, one has to watch the hour-long interview of Jeremy Crawford to know them, and not all of the design goals, not all of the rules elements have design goals explained for them in that video. And with players not being clear on what the reasons for these proposed changes are, they are less able to give useful feedback, and they have limited knowledge and are being kept out of the actual thought process for these rules. And I've seen serious efforts to play test those rules on the 1D&D subreddit, full play reports from people, and it is kind of a crime that their feedback is going to be equally weighted to the probably 10 times more people who will just not play test and just fill out the survey. So this is not a scientific approach. This is not a playtest. They're simply getting the gut reactions from people to the rules changes that they're proposing, and that is not adequate. Between the release of the 1D&D document and the survey, they could have corrected course. But the fact that they're not actually asking whether people are playtesting these rules that they're getting feedback on, combined with them saying this is playtesting the 5th edition, is lessening my confidence and should be cause for increased concern among players about whether Wizards of the Coast is actually going to address issues that players currently have in the system, and especially DMs. If they're only engaging in a facade of not having a new edition and a facade of a playtest, then they're not really doing the best that they can in making this next edition. Now on to the video I originally planned and recorded. It is less harsh than what I just said. I felt like I had to open it with this because it's the most important thing to take away from this quote-unquote playtest survey. And the video, as planned, as you'll see, is more specific about things that could have been done better. But yeah, I think the overall direction is inadequate and was most revealing by this one fact. So on to the regularly scheduled programming. Wizards of the Coast just released their survey asking for feedback on their first 1D&D document today, September 1st, and it's open until September 15th. And I found some positive things about the survey, but also found 7 mistakes that they make in this survey that they should not repeat in future surveys. My name is Ronald. I am the rules lawyer, and I have GM'd several systems, including Pathfinder 1st Edition and 2nd Edition and D&D 5th Edition. I teach middle schoolers and high schoolers RPGs. And my preferred system is Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and I think that for the next edition of D&D to be the best that it can be, they need to say it's a new edition, and they need to hold a proper playtest. And for those reasons, I've been critical of the 1D&D process so far. See my previous videos. So on my channel, I filled out the survey live, and you can see it, where I actually opened with a long list of things, 38 things I think, I hoped to see in the survey. The survey actually had almost half of those things, and I graded it C-. You can call me a strict teacher. But yeah, it actually does a number of positive things. It asked its respondents whether they used the rules in the document. That's very important. They can compare the responses of those who tried the rules versus those who didn't. And they gave people the opportunity to fill out boxes, open-ended questions as well, not simply asking people to do multiple choice. And they also, considering that they were asking people about feats, they asked people if they use feats in 5e. So those are very important things to understand their audience. But I did find several issues that I'm going to now identify. The first mistake is that when you open the survey, they call this a playtest of 5th edition. So they are walking back on previous statements that they've made. As maddeningly vague as saying this is a new evolution was, it at least did not deny that this is going to be a new edition of D&D. And they were also saying other things like that there were going to be fundamental updates to the system. And a lot of people have been saying this is a new edition, not just me. And this seems to be doubling down and responding to people like us saying, no, this is the same edition. And this poses a number of problems that I've said in my previous videos. First, it's you want to be honest with your players. If you're not, people will suspect the worst. You are making changes to the system. That is why you were doing what you were calling a playtest. You also don't want to say this is not a new edition so that you, the designers, and the players you're interacting with know that everything is open to improvement, that you and the players are now free to identify weak areas in the system, problems that you are now trying to solve, so that you can have focused play tests on openly identified things you're trying to solve. A second mistake is preventing player feedback on your design goals. In general, you want to openly identify your design goals, invite players to state their opinions on your design goals, because you need to know the goals before you can work out the specifics and assess the specifics in light of the goals you're trying to achieve. So for example, the article they put out makes changes to inspiration, makes it more likely for players to gain inspiration. And the problem that they identify in the interview Jeremy Crawford gave is that people were forgetting inspiration and not using it as much. Giving players inspiration when they roll a natural 20 is going to mean inspiration will be used more because they cannot have more than one, and because they can look forward to getting it more often, they're going to use it because they can't hoard them. And I would posit that if the design goal is to get people to use inspiration more, that there are possible other solutions to it. One reason they might not be using it is that it's somewhat lackluster. It gives you advantage on a roll, and so you have to declare it before you make the roll. And if you have advantage on an important check already, there's no reason to use inspiration. And there's quite a number of ways to gain advantage in the system that are out there. So I know from personal experience from Pathfinder 2nd Edition that its mechanic of hero points, which you can actually use after you make the roll, and so save until you do a really bad roll at a really bad time. I found that I don't forget hero points, And GMs, after several sessions, tend to not forget to give hero points. Not everyone's perfect, but I always I remember those as opposed to my experience GMing 5e. So I'm not saying this is a better solution. What I'm saying is that there needs to be by identifying what the problem is and exploring different solutions with the players and use the survey is a great time to, and a playtest is a great time to test that out. You are assuming the source of a problem and coming up with the solution somewhat prematurely. Another example is Jeremy Crawford's stated design goal behind removing monster critical hits, which is to prevent low-level characters from being instantly killed by a critical hit by a monster. And I would assume that they are trying to change that because a lot of campaigns, maybe the majority of D&D campaigns, start at level 3. And I would say that there could be more than one reason why D&D groups are not playing at level 1 and 2. Yes, maybe it is that they don't like the lethality of being low level. But also, it could possibly be that they don't have many interesting choices in battle. Maybe they only have 1 or 2 unique abilities. That is something to explore also before you... because it might turn out, we don't know unless they collect more data, maybe people actually like the lethality of low levels. Or they want to have the option to have a more lethal game by starting at low levels. And right now, they're kind of jumping the gun, assuming the nature of the problem and then coming up with a solution. A solution that has been very controversial, and I'll say more later in the video. But there were alternative ways to try to protect low-level characters, such as removing the massive damage rule or increasing the threshold at which a player character is killed. Those are just the most obvious solutions. So this mistake is leading to possibly misdiagnosing the problems, limiting the amount of effective feedback and suggestions that you could be getting from the community, and therefore prematurely coming up with fixes, and therefore not finding the best solutions. Mistake number 3 is that while they're getting feedback on a majority of the changes that they make in the article, some important ones they did not get feedback on, such as having starting characters have 3 languages, how they implement half races, having no sub-races for dwarves or halflings, and also choosing to create a new race, Ardlings, instead of having Asimars. These are things they could have gotten feedback on, and worst case scenario is that they chose not to get feedback on those. Mistake number 4 is not asking respondents whether they are a dungeon master. Dungeon masters are the proselytizers, they are the recruiters, they're the salespeople for your game. They are crucial to the growth of the hobby. The growth of D&D the last several years has been explosive, but I would argue that it could be more so. When I joined the official D&D Discord a few days ago, I saw that the ratio of people who chose the Discord role player compared to those who chose the Discord role DM was 30-1. And people can choose both, by the way. But that's a huge ratio. And from my personal experience, having taught about 200 students who went through my middle school after-school program, I find that I usually find a DM for every table, which has like 5 players. And additionally, those people I would call like really made to DM and love DMing, definitely, like vastly prefer it, are maybe 1 out of every 12 students. And so also consider the fact that DMs are disproportionately those who participate in online discussions and communities. So it's an alarming ratio, 30-1. That means that a lot of players are wanting to play, but not finding a DM to play the game. D&D has been, compared to previous editions, pretty easy for new players to jump into, and it's arguably easy for DMs at first. After some play with it, there are problems that accumulate that I won't go into detail here for DMs, And the danger here is that the survey is naturally going to be dominated numerically by players who do not DM. And you really want to know what DMs are thinking, given their disproportionate role of building your hobby. For example, what if the vast majority of players love having more inspiration more often, but the vast majority of DMs don't like it? That is something to seriously consider in deciding what rules to have in your game. Mistake number 5 is that satisfaction can mean many different things. And I'm going to cite a comment that was on my survey reaction video by Clayton Clemens, who writes, "As someone who works in data analytics, this was in fact a pretty rough survey. By using a 4-point scale for all their questions, the only quantitative data Wizards has is whether people like or dislike each feature. In many analyses, the difference between satisfied and very satisfied is negligible. The degree of satisfaction is often, not always, compressed into a binary yes or no, plus a neutral, usually, which is notably absent from this survey. They really missed out on having more specific and nuanced canned options for each group of questions. For example, for each race feature, they could have given an array of check marks that collect true-false data, such as balanced relative to other race features, felt iconic and flavorful for the race, felt intrinsic, every member of the race could believably have this feature, seemed exciting, fun to use, seemed relevant after level 1. Hopefully they have a good way to look at the qualitative feedback and open-ended questions, because otherwise they're free to build almost any interpretation they want on this data. For example, if they have a lot of dissatisfaction from a rules change, they can say, oh, 5e is perfect and doesn't need this change. Or if there's a lot of satisfaction for a change, they can say, oh, these changes are perfect as they are, ship them with no adjustments. So to give examples, there's an overall question on how satisfied we are with the backgrounds and how they're implemented. When I encountered that question, I had conflicting thoughts. First, I thought it was good and positive that ability score changes were moved from races to backgrounds. On the other hand, I thought that there was a better way they could implement ability score adjustments as I go into my video. And there was no neutral choice. I had to say satisfied or dissatisfied to that question. And there was no comment box for me to elaborate on how I answered. By saying either satisfied or dissatisfied, they could draw the completely wrong conclusion with either response. And so instead what we get is a set of questions that are comparing the backgrounds to each other. How many people actually play tested it in their games? How many are you satisfied or dissatisfied with each individual feat? And this can, of course, give data that doesn't tell Wizards the whole story. For example, let's say players say Urchin is something they're very satisfied. Urchin is a background that gives you a +2 dexterity and the lucky feat. These are both arguably more powerful in 5e, and also with the lucky feat as provided, than the artisan background, which gives you a +2 in intelligence and the crafter feat. Well, many people are very satisfied with that, but that doesn't mean there are problems with the background. It could be possibly too powerful compared to the other backgrounds. If you're taking seriously making some feats or some backgrounds not auto picks. They make the same mistake of asking a superficial question about people's level of satisfaction with the different races and racial features, the feats, and the different rules elements in the glossary at the end. And there's another related issue. They did not ask whether people were building their backgrounds versus those who chose from the list. And if they chose from the list, if they play tested Artisan, for example, did they use it as is, or did they modify one or more of the things that it gives? And which ones did they modify? This is important information to be able to evaluate whether people are using your list at all. And if they are, how they're using it. Are you meeting your design goal of providing a simpler method to make your background for those players who want to just pick a background and not think purely about optimization and choosing every element from a menu. And if the vast majority of people who are choosing their background from the list are making modifications to the list, perhaps you're not meeting your design goal of including the list in the first place. Mistake number 6. This kind of combines some of the previous mistakes, but I thought it needed to be highlighted because it touches on maybe the most controversial change in the document, and that is critical hits. They simply ask whether you are satisfied or dissatisfied with critical hits in the document. The first problem is that there are 4 changes to critical hits that they have not disaggregated. 1, doubling the damage dice for weapons and unarmed attacks only, as opposed to from additional sources, such as sneak attack and divine smite. 2, no longer double damage for spell attacks that critically hit. 3, monsters no longer do critical hits. And arguably number 4, replacing critical hits for monsters that roll a natural 20 is recharging of rechargeable, more powerful abilities, like a Dragon's Breath weapon, as Jeremy Crawford described in the interview. Which, by the way, was not stated in the document itself. I would argue the majority of people responding to these surveys did not watch the hour-long interview with Jeremy Crawford. A lot of people have commented negatively to the changes to critical hits about rogues and paladins being nerfed by their special ways of increasing damage no longer doubling on a crit, and not wanting monsters to lose critical hits. And they're all conflated in this single question, and it means it's pretty much a useless question for the developers. The danger here is that there's going to be a lot of negative feedback about critical hits, and the design goals that informed these changes will be lost in the vote. So, for example, I am open to the fact that monsters not critting on 20s may be a good idea, and having rechargeable abilities is a more exciting way to run combats. However, we were not given any examples of monster stat blocks in the playtest document. If you just read the playtest document and did not see the interview, you're not going to have any idea what the design team was trying to do by taking critical hits away from the monsters. And also the other design goal of protecting low-level characters. That's all completely subsumed into the single question asking people if they're satisfied or dissatisfied, with no reference to the design goals served by the changes. It is frankly terrible. Some good ideas may therefore die on the vine, and the danger here is that Wizards may take a very dissatisfied vote on critical hits and say, critical hits are now perfect as they are, and nothing will change in this regard. And also might dismiss the design goals behind the changes to critical hits as well. Finally, as a short one, mistake number 7 is that some questions were premature because players are not given a proper opportunity to playtest them. I already spoke about the removal of critical hits from monsters being replaced with rechargeable abilities that recharge on a natural 20. Were given no stat blocks to test that idea with. Another example is having 3 spell lists, Arcane, Divine, and Primal, and each spellcasting class being tied to one of these 3 lists. There's going to be concern among people that this will make a lot of the classes too similar to each other. A lot of the signature abilities may be subsumed in these generic lists. We need to see actual classes and see what is preserved in the spellcasting classes to make them feel unique in order for us to actually be able to assess the change to 3 spell lists. However, we're being asked, are we satisfied or dissatisfied with the 3 spell lists? And that's inadequate, and it's a premature question. The last thing I'll say is that Wizards should report on the survey to players and say what worked, what was popular among the different ideas, and to discuss the design goals that they were trying to meet with the first document, and whether that has made them reevaluate some things and whether it has confirmed some things for them. Having some transparency. They do, after all, report on how successfully different subsidiaries and divisions of their company perform to their investors. And I think the players who pay Wizards of the Coast are equally, if not more, deserving of some transparency to know whether they are being served by the company. So that's it. Oh, and also my second video gave a good example of a post-survey article by the designers from another company, and I think that serves as a good model for Wizards. So that's been it. This has been a relatively short video for me, and if you like my thoughts and criticisms as I continue to follow 1D&D as they put out new documents and surveys, and also want to hear more of my thoughts about other RPGs, then like and subscribe, ring the bell. That's it. I am the Rules Lawyer, and I'll see you next time.